Anarchism is a very difficult ideology to define, in large part due to the wide variety of ideological influences that have shaped it. Drawing from both socialist and liberal traditions, anarchism blends the two into a unique yet arguably unstable mixture. It should therefore be no surprise that anarchists tend to split down the middle into collectivist anarchists, those who draw more from socialism, and individualist anarchists, those who draw more from liberalism. For brevity's sake, we will be focusing on the collectivist side of anarchist thought in this video, although we will certainly return to the other side of anarchism in the future. At a base level, anarchism is the belief in unrestricted personal freedom, that human beings should be allowed to live their lives free from restriction by any outside body. Similarly to socialism, traces of anarchist thought can be seen in many of the radical religious preachers of the Reformation. However, it was William Godwin, the famous English radical and husband of Mary Wollstonecraft, who is usually considered the first anarchist, although he never used the term himself. Godwin proposed a society that had no need for government, and believed that since people were rational actors, they could govern themselves through education and debate. Godwin saw the state as interfering in that process, and thus as an evil force within society. After Godwin, anarchism as an idea began to become more entwined with the budding socialist movement of the mid-19th century. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was a French politician and the first person to describe themselves as an anarchist. He became a prominent figure in the International Working Men's Association before it split into Marxist and anarchist factions. The last time that collectivist anarchist thought was an important player on the political scene was through revolutionary trade unions in a movement known as anarcho-syndicalism. This idea thrived in France, Spain and Italy during the early 20th century, but was ultimately defeated after the loss of the Republicans during the Spanish Civil War. Today, collectivist anarchism is mostly an intellectual phenomenon with little support among the wider population. As discussed before, anarchism draws from the philosophies of both liberalism and socialism, and in doing so changes those ideas to fit its own philosophical requirements. The core ideas of human nature, the individual, freedom, and anti-statism are, however, common across both sides of anarchist thought. Collectivist anarchists have an extremely optimistic, some would say utopian, view of human nature. They believe that human beings are naturally cooperative and will normally act peacefully towards each other. They also argue that culture and society can influence human nature. Therefore, this is the reason for the existence of violence, hatred, and bigotry, rather than an inherent flaw in human nature or human reason. Despite drawing heavily from socialism in its attitude to human nature, collectivist anarchism argues that respect must be shown towards the individual within society. Anarchists are generally more supportive of individual rights than Marxists, and prominent collectivist anarchists, such as Bakunin, are noted for their valuing of the individual as a political concept, even as they argue against the more common liberal forms of individualism. What defines anarchism, perhaps more than anything else, is its embrace of unrestricted or unfettered freedom. To an anarchist, freedom means being free from all laws and rules laid down by governments, courts, or the state more generally. As has been touched upon briefly before this point, anarchism views the state as the cause of all vice and immorality within society. Not only do anarchists argue that the laws and provisions of the state oppress all those that labour under it, they also argue that wielding a position of power within the state inherently corrupts all those who achieve it. In this sense, the state is seen as a negative force, both for those who lack power and for those who wield it. The different forms of collectivist anarchism all hold roughly the same beliefs about human nature. Where they differ is in what their view of an anarchist society would look like. The three most important strands of collectivist anarchism are anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, and mutualism. These all imagine a stateless society and economic freedom, but their views on what that society would look like are very different. Mutualism is often seen as a middle ground between collectivist and individualist anarchism, as it rejects capitalism while also supporting its own form of a market system. Mutualism is most closely associated with the French anarchist Joseph Proudhon, who argued for a society based around voluntary association that allowed peasants and workers to own small amounts of land and partake in a non-capitalist form of a market. Proudhon argued for an economy based around labour notes, where those notes would be valued by how much time a worker had spent creating a product or service, rather than the value of the end product or service itself. Unlike most forms of anarchism, which date from the 19th century, anarcho-syndicalism was developed in the early 20th century out of the revolutionary trade union movements taking root across Europe. Syndicalism was a form of revolutionary socialism that focused on the labour movement and trade unions as a means of facilitating the workers' uprising and the victory of the proletariat. Anarcho-syndicalism melded this with anarchistic thought to create an ideal of a stateless society brought about by revolutionary trade unions through a general strike. Arguably the first major form of collectivist anarchism, anarcho-communism became its own ideology distinct from Marxism after the Marxist-anarchist split within the International Working Men's Association in 1872. Sharing with Marxism much of its theoretical foundation, what sets anarcho-communism apart is its rejection of the dictatorship of the proletariat, as to an anarchist, any form of a state, even a workers' state, is evil and corrupting. Unlike, say, Marxism and its derivatives, anarchism as an ideology has had very few real-world applications, the most often discussed being its implementation during the Spanish Civil War. As a result of this, anarchism is mostly confined to the realm of theory and intellectual debate, rather than practical action. This is in part due to anarchists' rejection of liberal democracy, as they see it as just another form of an oppressive state. Therefore, taking part in Liberal Democratic Party politics would be contrary to anarchist thought. This ends my introduction to anarchism. I hope to return to the topic for a more in-depth look in the future. For now, please consider subscribing if you'd like to hear more about political ideas, and feel free to rate the video and discuss the ideas presented in the comments below.